Go.
All right, this is a move up. This is a support surface. This is a level 2. It's much more aggressive. It's a mattress replacement system, meaning you take the whole mattress off the bed, and this is the whole mattress. The inside of this has got several bladders that run the width of the bed, and they will inflate, and they do several things. This particular machine is called an alternating low air loss. It'll alternate the pressure. It'll alternate by filling every other one up and then go back and forth just like an APP does. But it's also designed with these center that says ventilated bladders. These bladders that are here in the middle have small perforations in them that allow air to leak out. And drop the camera. No. They allow the air to leak out, and that gets the air moving underneath the patient and keeps them dry. So there's two things that can cause pressure points, is sitting in one place for too long, and if they get wet. So if they have an incontinence issue and they're wet and they're sitting on those pressure points, the skin breaks down very, very quickly. So this low air loss system dries them out and keeps that, it removes that cause from your pressure, or from your pressure, your bed sores. Your, what are they called? They're bed sores.
Mm-hmm.
What's the?
Pressure ulcers.
Pressure ulcers. The problem that you'll have with these is these little connections and fittings can pop off over time. There's a lot of movement going on with these beds, so they can work their way free. So these fittings, as tight as they may be, they can come loose over time. And so if you've got a bed that's flat in one area, you got to unzip this cover, pull this aside, and start looking at all these fittings. So you got to look at every single one, and there is a lot of fittings in here. The other problem that you may have, this has what's called a CPR. You can see this. You've got a CPR. This is an emergency thing. If they had to do CPR on somebody, this air mattress does not allow them to do compressions because it's too springy. So they have to have this system where they can take this off. All the vents it'll vent all the air out of the mattress quickly, and they can start CPR. So it's an emergency thing, but this can be a pain because if that's loose, your mattress won't pump up. So you got to make sure you have that tight. Also, the fittings that connect in here can come off, and they also, I've had them where they connect down here. I've had problems with them coming off down here as well, because this gets pulled on and tugged on. That's probably where you're going to have most of your problems, honestly, is this piece here, because it's getting tugged on.
That one's off.
Well, this one doesn't have a fitting. Right there. So see, we've had a problem with this one. That's where our low pressure was. This machine wasn't pumping up right. Now, that fitting right there, if that is missing, it won't fill up. It'll sit there and it throws an alarm, low pressure alarm. So that has been, that part right there has been probably 5 times out of 6 will be that part right there. So that's the problem, okay? Now, the other thing with this APM, because we are replacing the whole mattress and this is moving a lot and so forth, this has to be strapped to the bed. You have to strap these to the bed. You've got to be careful where you strap these. You've got to strap this to the movable part of the bed. You do not want to strap this to the frame that's permanent, because when the bed moves, it's going to tear all this apart and it's going to be a mess. Mm-hmm. So make sure you're attaching this. Maybe let's go over here and look at a bed.
Just the top.
Just when you're attaching that, it's got to be to this part of the bed that's moving. Do not attach it to that, because this is going to move and tear it apart. So just always just to the movable part of the frame.
Why do you know that, Travis?
It's been done. And I'm sure it's been done many, many times. The problem with these APMs, they're very expensive. Very expensive. And you don't want to tear them up. The other end of things, this one's, because this is a low air loss and an alternating, it has larger hoses, and it has 3 hoses instead of 2. It has to move a lot more air because this is leaking all the time. It has to have a lot more volume moving through it, so you have to have bigger hoses and more hoses for them. The other thing on this is adjust. There's a lot of settings on this. Review the owner's manual on this if you've had a lot of questions, but we'll go through it quickly on here because these can be problematic. Your on-off switch is here. It will fire up. This is adjusting your pressure. This is the firmness of your bed. So you can adjust that to firmer or softer, depending on the comfort level of the patient and the therapy needs. This is your cycle time. This is how quickly that will roll the every other chamber. So do you want that chamber to be moved? Do you want them moving every 10 minutes or every 25 minutes? That allows you to set that type of pressure.
What would you typically set it at?
The recommendation is to move a patient every 15 minutes. So I would go 10 or 15, no more than 15, but that depends on the doctor's order and the facility. Typically these will be in a facility, and the facility may have certain turning protocols that they call, and they'll dictate what they want there. But I'd recommend 15 minutes at the most in most cases. But then you also have a static mode and an alternating mode. Static mode allows you to, it just will not move the patient. It'll just do the low air loss part of this. If they're in a seated position, they put more pressure on their bum, and that will make these go flat or a little more flat, and so they can come in contact with the frame of the bed or the springs. So they may want to engage that at some point. Now this right now we can't do anything with it because it's got a lock. This lock button right here, we're going to push and hold that for a few seconds, and that takes off. Now we can start adjusting. So we go from static to alternating now, so we can move that back and forth. If we need to put it in a seated position, it'll throw more pressure into those areas where their bottom's going to be sitting. Auto firm, if a nurse comes in and they're wanting to, nurse comes in and they want to work with the patient, it's really hard to work with a patient with a really soft bed. So they'll hit this auto firm, it'll firm the bed up so they can change their clothes, change the bedding, and then they can put it back onto the rotation. That will automatically go off after a certain amount of time, but that allows them to work with that patient a little bit better. There's also an alarm here, it's a mute. If you want to mute the alarm on it, you can do that if the alarm's going off, because it'll drive them crazy because it just keeps on going. Then when you're done, when everything's set where you want, you can push and hold that lock button, and it locks all your settings in place so that you can't have like a child or someone bump it. You know, if you're in an Alzheimer's unit, there's lots of buttons here for them to play with. So you can lock that in place and take care of that. Now on here it's showing right now, it's showing low pressure because this isn't filled up all the way. If you're watching this for a minute, these are starting to inflate. Again, this is like your APP. Take this in first and start it pumping because it's going to take 10 to 15 minutes for this to fully inflate. On your APP or the APMs, they're not the low air loss. They're a much slower pump. They're going to take 15, maybe 20 minutes for them to pump up because they're running off the same kind of pump the APPs are, but they're filling bladders like this that are 5 times bigger. So those really take a long time. We do have a pump that can speed it up. Do we have that, James? We've got just an air compressor thing. It blows air pretty quickly. Yeah, there you go. If you're taking out an APM, this low air loss one's not so much a big deal, but this little pump here, James, you came up with this little design, didn't you, at the top of this?
Yeah.
This was usually, you can just fill up one at a time, but James designed this so that you can put this little T-piece on here, put your tubing on either side and turn this thing on, and it'll pop your APM full in about 2 minutes. Then you take tape, pull your tubing off and take tape over the end of that, and it keeps it pumped, so when you deliver it, it's full and you're in and out. Otherwise, you're going to be sitting there for 20 minutes.
Because this isn't something you have on your van.
Yeah, this is rare.
So if it's an APM, fill it before you go.
Before you go. Plus, then you know it's working.
Yeah.
You don't have a hole in it. You don't have tubing off or something like that. These are a little bit problematic because there is so much movement in them, and you have things popping off on them once in a while. So filling beforehand is probably a good practice. Now we do have them in the storage unit, so you can't really do that in a storage unit necessarily. So you're going to have to take the time to let them fill. But these are level 2. This one's a really high-end type thing. It's got the alternating and the low air loss in it. Most of them will just have the APM part, which is just the alternating parts of this, and it's just really simple. It's almost like hooking up an APP, just a bigger brother of it. Okay, that's about it on those.